would consider inaudible the heartbeat of a mouse. After sunset, we see but little, and we assume the night to blind our fellow creatures as well. We would grope through the forest even by moonlight, and can hardly imagine a predator making a full-speed strike in total darkness, in total silence. In these assumptions, the owls prove us wrong. The owls are, by any standard, the ultimate winged hunters of the night. They can, and routinely do, swoop down on their prey with deadly precision in the total absence of light. As casually as we would stroll the sidewalk at noon, do they haunt the forest in the shroud of midnight. Owls have always held a special fascination for mankind. Ancient peoples regarded them as spirit beings, augurs of the future, symbols of evil or wisdom or mystery. But they become even more fascinating when we stop thinking of them as mere symbols and take a look at the owls up close. Night, a time of mystery, a time of danger. But one winged hunter is at home in the darkness, patrolling the night forest.
Hi, I'm Michael Godfrey, your host on this journey into the realm of the owls. We'll look at the adaptations which make the owls such successful hunters by day and by night. And we'll see the varied lifestyles which enable 18 species of owls to range across just about every habitat the North American continent offers. And we'll explore the ways you and I can interact with these engaging birds in the wild. More often than we would guess, the wilds of our own backyard.
Many of the owls go largely unnoticed by man because they are active only at night. These birds have mastered the challenge of hunting in the darkness. Their abilities seem almost supernatural to us, but there are good natural reasons for their skills in the dark. Some other creatures of the night have very poor eyesight, as if they had evolutionarily given up on trying to see in the dark. But the owls have gone the opposite direction. They can see wondrously well in dim light, even the faint starlight that filters into the forest on a moonless night. The eyes of an owl are very large, in some species as large as the eyes of a full-grown human. The retina, the area within the eye where images register, is covered with light-sensitive cells called rods and cones, just as in the human eye. But in the eye of a typical owl, there are far more rods than cones, and far more than in most living creatures. Since the rods are very sensitive to detecting dim light, An owl is able to see much more detail in near darkness than we can. There's a trade-off, though. The cones, of which owls have relatively few, are the receptor cells sensitive to color. So to some degree, owls are probably colorblind. Owls can also see perfectly well in daylight. In fact, they have far sharper vision than you or I under any conditions. Unlike us, however, an owl has eyes which are fixed in the sockets. It cannot look in a different direction without moving its head. Therefore, an owl has an exceptionally limber neck. It can swivel its head so far to the left that it is looking over its right shoulder, a full 270 degrees. Owls gain a certain amount of distance information by a technique called motion parallax, keeping the subject in motion relative to its background or foreground. This occurs when the bird is in flight or when it gyrates to create motion. But sometimes the night is so dark as to confound even the sharpest eyes. The owl's sense of hearing is even more remarkable than its eyesight. Experiments have shown that an owl can hunt in absolute darkness, pinpointing its prey by sound alone. Humans can locate sounds in 2 dimensions. That is, we can judge what direction the sound is coming from, but not its height. An owl, on the other hand, can locate the source of a sound in 3 dimensions. Although it has only 2 ears, those ears are constructed differently from ours. At the National Audubon Society's Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary in Florida, Ranger Paul Hinchcliffe uses the skull of a barred owl to demonstrate to some visitors how the hidden but lopsided ears of owls can locate sound so precisely.
Owls do have ears. All birds have ears. They have openings in the skull on either side, just like you do. But take a look at these on an owl. These are different shapes on both sides. There's all the bones
asymmetry in the placement of owls' ears occurs in the vertical axis. The ears are symmetrical left to right, but not up and down. The right ear is higher than the left and is aimed more upward. Those of us who move in 2-dimensional worlds get the directional information we need by interpreting the minute interval between the arrival of a sound wave in each of our symmetrically placed ears. Unless we're directly facing a sound source, the sound will strike one of our ears before the other, betraying the direction. The more to one side of our head the sound source, the greater the interval. Probing the 3-dimensional night on the wing or from a high limb, owls fix the azimuth of a sound source just as we do, while the vertical asymmetry of their ears causes sounds coming from below to strike the left ear before the right, producing an interval in the vertical axis as well. So the owl senses the source's position up and down, as well as left to right. The precise hearing of owls is good enough to compensate for eye problems. This one-eyed western screech owl in Arizona gets along quite well despite its visual handicap. Many kinds of owls have a tuft of feathers on each side of the head, often called ear tufts, as in the name of this long-eared owl. Actually, these tufts really have nothing to do with the ears. They may help with camouflage, breaking up the outline of the bird. If the ear tufts don't appear to be doing the trick, a wing may be draped across the light underparts to further violate the eye's expectations. Fewer than half our owl species show ear tufts, but even a round-headed bird, like a northern pygmy owl, can raise little horns above the eyes when excited. Although the so-called ear tufts have no significance to the real ears, scientists suspect that the disc of feathers that seems to frame each side of the face might assist with hearing, perhaps by helping funnel sounds into the amazingly large ear openings located just behind the disc. Although, so far, this acoustic design is still one of the owl's mysteries. Owls have to be able to hear their prey in the darkness. But in many cases, their prey is also listening for the approach of predators. For the owl to be successful in hunting, it must avoid being heard. Most large birds, when they fly, make relatively loud flapping and rustling sounds. But owls, in addition to their keen senses, are also equipped with an amazing ability to silence their wing strokes. The body feathers of owls are extremely soft and fluffy, and they help to muffle any sounds. This great gray owl looks like a very large bird, but half of its bulk is made up of feathers alone. In addition, certain feathers in the wing have softened edges so that their wing beats are silent. Back at Audubon's Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, Ranger Paul Hinchcliffe demonstrates this difference. This wing of a red-shouldered hawk makes an audible rushing sound when it's flapped. But the wing of a barred owl makes no sound, even though it's the same size.
The effect of that velvet or furry type of a texture to owl's wing is to muffle its sound in the air.
With adaptations like these, all the owls are well equipped for hunting. But each kind of owl puts that equipment to work in a different way, hunting different prey in different habitats. For this reason, at least a few kinds of owls can be found in every part of North America. But there's no place where all of our owls can be found together. Each has its own specialization. One owl that can be found throughout North America, and most of South America as well, is the great horned owl. This bird can live practically anywhere because it will eat practically anything. Often called the tiger of the night, this bold hunter will not hesitate to attack rats, frogs, rabbits, stray cats, snakes, skunks, and even smaller owls. Pound for pound, the great horned owl is one of the most capable predators on Earth. It can kill and fly away with prey 3 times its weight. Research has shown that this owl may not tolerate any other raptor in its nesting territory, a fierceness attested to by occasional heaps of barred owl feathers, perhaps, sadly, beneath a grieving survivor. To appreciate the respect accorded this winged wolverine by other birds of prey, consider the well-known loyalty of the bald eagle to its nest. A pair may use one of these massive structures for decades. In South Carolina's Ace Basin, researchers found protruding above an eagle's nest the ear tufts of an incubating horned owl. Although much larger than the owl, the eagles built another nest and did not challenge the usurping owls, whose limbing young were later seen exploring the handsome architecture. Because it will accept such a variable diet, the great horned owl is at home in the swamp, in the desert, at the edge of the Arctic tundra, and everywhere in between. It may land on the forest floor to hunt on foot, or it may take a perch to scrutinize a rustle in the leaves. The hunting strike of this powerful bird leaves little hope of escape. Much smaller and much more specialized is the flammulated owl. This gnome of the coniferous forest of the West almost never eats anything larger than a moth. Moths and other insects become hard to find in colder seasons when snow falls in the forest, so the flammulated owl must migrate south to winter in Mexico. An even smaller hunter is the tiny elf owl. This well-named bird is one of the smallest owls in the world, about the size of a large hummingbird. The elf owl is common in the deserts and canyons of the American Southwest, but only in summer. In winter, it must move farther south to find the beetles and other insects it needs to survive. The cryptic seasonal migration of owls was little noted until recently, but researchers are finding that, like the waterfowl and the hawks, owls move freely across political frontiers. Whitefish Point, on the north side of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, is a funneling spot for owls moving northward in spring, and it's a reliable place to encounter one of North America's most elusive birds, the boreal owl. This pint-sized predator hunts the mixed coniferous and deciduous forests as far north as trees grow, taking lemmings, other rodents, and small birds. It has even been known to catch bats in flight. Open fields and marshes are the habitat of the short-eared owl, and this bird feeds almost entirely on small rodents, mice and voles. Sometimes, when there is a population explosion of mice, a dozen or more short-eared owls may hunt over the same fields, locking talons over hunting rights. We know a lot about the food habits of the short-eared owl and other kinds of owls. This is not because researchers have watched them all day and all night to find out what the birds were eating. Instead, scientists can find and analyze owl pellets. In Montana, owl researcher Denver Holt demonstrates this technique.
And what we do is we locate these pellets from the short-eared owl, which just flushed from here, and we look for the bone content and hopefully skulls, and that will determine what the owl's been eating. So what we do is we open these pellets up and we locate a skull like you're seeing right here, and we look at the dentition. Now,
by reversing his binoculars, Holt is able to use them as a microscope to examine details of the teeth of these tiny rodents.
The pattern on the dentition, on the second molar here, is telling me that this is a metal vole, Microtus pennsylvanicus.
Without owl pellets, it would be very hard to study the eating habits of some owls. Consider the spotted owl, a nocturnal hunter of wilderness in the West. This rare bird lives only in old-growth forest or in steep mountain canyons, where it is often difficult to locate and very difficult to watch hunting. In the wilderness of the far north, across northern Canada and Alaska, the shifting seasons bring very long days in summer and very long nights in winter. The owls that live there, like this northern hawk owl, must cope with hunting under an extreme range of light conditions, as well as extremes of cold. But even in the hardest winter, very few hawk owls need to wander south of Canada. Their abilities as hunters provide for them even under the harshest conditions. Sharing the northern forest with the hawk owl is another wilderness bird, the great gray owl. In addition to the far north, this bird also lives in high mountains, and a few can be seen as far south as Yosemite in California. Although it looks larger than any other North American owl, it actually weighs less than the familiar great horned owl, and it feeds mostly on mice, voles, and other small rodents. This ghost of the taiga hunts by listening for the faint sounds of rodents under the snow, perhaps launching to hover above a promising whisper. The spruce grouse long ago earned the folk name fool hen because it could easily be caught by hand. The Arctic fox has been known to bedevil travelers on the tundra, constantly testing for lax vigilance at the food sled. Such characteristic tameness, or lack of a prudent wariness of humans, is shared by many creatures of the far north, and the northerly owls are no exception. Roosting during daylight, the little saw-whet owl tolerates a close approach in a Michigan grove. By nightfall, this drowsy diminutive becomes a capable hunter. The ultimate northern owl is the snowy owl, colored for camouflage in an Arctic world. In summer, they are found far above the Arctic Circle, farther north than any other owl. But every winter, a few of these big white birds visit the lower 48 states. This old male, nearly ice white, hunts from a pressure ridge in the coastal ice of Lake Ontario, painting his frozen realm with the graceful strokes of his hunting sweeps. One of the ice owl's regular winter haunts in New England is Logan Airport, along the busy edge of Boston Harbor. Norm Smith of the Massachusetts Audubon Society has been studying the snowy owls here since 1981, and he has found that this unusual location is a good one both for the owls and for his studies.
Logan Airport is about 1,800 acres of fields, terminals, and runways. And back in 1981, I got involved in this project to work with the snowy owls out here at the airport. There were confrontations with planes and aircraft, and they didn't want the owls to get hit or killed by the planes, and they didn't want the planes or the owls to cause any problems to the planes. So we came out here and actually trapped 2 of the owls out and removed the birds, and shortly after the birds were removed, they came right back to the airport. And then in observing the owls since '81, we've come to the conclusion that the owls actually are beneficial out at the airport because they keep the small numbers of, or the large numbers of small birds like snow buntings and starlings and things off some of the adjacent runways because they eat them. And just by the presence of the owl being there helps keep the bird populations off the runways and airways, which certainly is a problem. And the ideal situation here at the airport is that it's, as you can see, really short mowed grass with little knolls in it, has a few small wet pans in it, and is very much like the tundra situation that they come from. So that would seem to attract the owls. The other thing that's real beneficial is that there's a tremendous amount of food supply here, such as Norway rats are very common, and that seems to be one of their primary food sources. What we'll do here is weigh the bird first, so stick them inside the can.
Studying snowy owls is a family project for Norm Smith and his children. Daughter Danielle and son Josh are skilled at helping their father band these powerful birds, which can be very dangerous when handled. A moment's carelessness could result in a serious injury should the inch-long talons drive into the hand or arm. After the birds are captured, they are carefully measured, weighed, and examined for external parasites. The banding and color marking make it possible to recognize individuals later. So these studies have revealed much about the winter movements of snowies.
Very impressive birds. And as you can see, the snowies, their wings are much more pointed than the other owls, like the great horn. They're not as rounded, and their wings are longer. Probably gives them the ability to fly faster.
Smith's observations at the airport have given him insight into the habits of the snowy owls, including the daily schedule of the birds in winter and details of their hunting behavior.
The birds that come here, not only do they just roost at the airport, they also hunt at the airport. They also hunt in downtown Boston. Snowy owls in this particular location are basically nocturnal. They come out here during the daytime and they'll sleep or roost for extended periods of time, and about an hour before sunset they'll start to preen their feathers, stretch their wings and legs, cough up a pellet, and then proceed into their hunting mode.
Because access is restricted over much of the airport, the snowy owls enjoy protection from humans by staying here. In a way, however, the owls are returning the favor, providing a kind of protection of their own. Owls and humans coexist nearly everywhere, though, as a rule, only the owls know that. The benefit is almost always mutual, though, again, the owls generally place a higher value on the relationship than we do. At Boston's airport, owls and humans live together in perceived mutual benefit. It is encouraging, too, to know that these big white birds accept urban Boston for half the year before returning to spend the other half in the endless wilderness of the Arctic tundra. A scant century ago, Western North America was cloaked in a sea of native grasses, supporting an opulent life system, the most visible expression of which were tens of millions of bison. In an orgy of destruction, we squandered the grassland's ecosystem. Still, when we pass through a grassland remnant today, we can enjoy its remarkable diversity. A clue that we are in true grasslands may take the form of a fence post slightly taller than the rest, the burrowing owl, a bird which actually digs a den. It's a long way from the western prairies to the housing developments of Florida. And although the burrowing owl has declined in the face of advancing civilization, some of today's best burrowing owl habitat is found in suburbia. Cindy Baer, environmental educator with the Lee County, Florida schools, talks about how the burrowing owls fit into the neighborhood in Cape Coral, Florida.
Most people love them. They're so fun to watch. You can learn a lot from them. They're easy to see. It's not like you have to have an incredible wilderness experience to be able to watch them. So people really love them. This year is the first year that the city of Cape Coral has really enforced a requirement that people wait to build on a lot if there's a nest of burrowing owls there present. In years past, we were losing about 20% of our nests during the nesting season just to houses being built alone. And when you take 20% of all your nests right off the top being lost to something like construction, then you've got a big problem, because there are other factors. Flooding of the nests if we have too much rain. Cars kill a lot of the owls. Cats, dogs, hawks actually eat some of the burrowing owls, crows. So when you add in all those factors, plus 20% of all the nests lost to housing construction, you've got a real problem with not being able to maintain a stable population. So when there's not enough houses, there's not as much of the insect prey that the owls need. If you get too many houses, there's too many cars, cats, dogs, and those other things that take their toll on owls. So what we need for burrowing owls to ensure a stable population is a habitat purchase plan that will be a mosaic effect. Little neighborhoods with houses and vacant lots, and then houses and vacant lots, and houses and vacant lots. It's it's kind of counterintuitive. At least it was for me, because you think about buying wildlife habitat as going out and purchasing these great expanses of land, but that won't work for burrowing owls. They need people, and people seem to really appreciate that.
Don't you dare disturb those owls.
The owls that are active in the daytime are not all denizens of open country. Here we travel to the woodlands of Whitetail Canyon in the magical mountains of southeastern Arizona, where naturalist Rick Taylor calls up a northern pygmy owl in broad daylight.
Here he comes.
The pygmy owl hunts by day because it eats mainly small birds. The birds know it, too. When they hear the call notes of their predator, these songbirds come in to harass the owl in a behavior known as mobbing. Surrounded by an angry mob, the pygmy owl needs eyes in the back of its head, and it almost appears to have them, with a set of eye spots that may keep the birds from approaching too closely, even from the back. Larger owls are even more inviting targets for hecklers, as in this encounter between a short-eared owl and a red-winged blackbird. A mockingbird makes a sport of pestering the burrowing owl. Even the mighty great horned owl endures its share of mobbing from smaller, more agile birds, such as blue jays. Crows enjoy owl pestering as much as any bird, and if the object of their attention is as irresistible as the great horned owl, they may even be joined in the game by a red-shouldered hawk. But as evening approaches, the hecklers decamp, for they know the darkness belongs to the owl. Owls nest, but as a generality, they do not build nests. They simply lay eggs and raise their young in the best nesting place they can find. Some, like the great horned owl and the great gray owl, are platform nesters and are generally indifferent to offerings of artificial nest platforms, although the great gray has been known to accept them. More than half the North American species nest in cavities of one form or another, and the scarcity of natural tree cavities provides opportunities for human interaction. Gus Ben David is manager of Massachusetts Audubon Society's Felix Neck Sanctuary on Martha's Vineyard. In the 1970s, Gus began experimenting with nesting shelters for barn owls. In just 15 years, Gus's efforts have raised Martha's Vineyard's barn owl population from 2 nesting pairs to 28. The headquarters building at the Felix Neck Sanctuary is a converted barn, complete with barn owl nesting entrance. Any evening at dusk, you can watch the strictly nocturnal barn owls leave the headquarters for the night's hunt. As its name reflects, the barn owl has learned to benefit from the close association of man with rats, and often lives near such rodent magnets as barns and urban garbage. This is a bird of open farming country, even towns, but it is not often seen because of its retiring nocturnal habits. An abandoned silo serves admirably for roosting and nesting. As with all owls, barn owls begin to incubate as soon as the first egg is laid. The young hatch in sequence, and the nest mates vary in size. Crooning his eerie screech, the father barn owl brings rats to his mate, who passes them to the young. She yields the food to the most aggressive youngster, usually the oldest, when that bird is hungry. After the larger chicks have eaten, the littlest owl shows how it's done. This Herculean achievement, swallowing a rodent nearly its own size, took more than half an hour and left the youngster exhausted. On occasion, we might find a baby owl alone with the parents nowhere in sight. We're making a serious mistake if we assume that such a bird needs our help. Raising a young owl is difficult, a job for trained rehabilitators who have the licenses necessary. Besides, as we might guess from this performance, these appealing little owls are not helpless, and their parents are in attendance nearby. Some kinds of owls adapt readily to life in residential neighborhoods. Eastern and western screech owls are often found in suburban backyards and city parks. They'll raise their young in man-made nesting boxes built to the right specifications. At the Surrett Nature Center in Berrien Springs, Michigan, a wood duck box provides a screech owl quarters for roosting in winter and nesting in springtime. In Asheboro, North Carolina, David and Lynn Qualls enjoy an evening's owl watching in their own garden. Eastern screech owls occur as both red and gray morphs, and the Qualls owls are a mixed morph pair. The male is gray and the female red. It's common practice among raptors that the male will capture the prey and give it to the female, who conveys it immediately to the young. The Cape Coral burrowing owls observe the same protocol. Despite the owl's reputation for mysterious ways, they are found in all parts of North America, sometimes in close association with mankind. Wherever you live, you can probably go out and see owls for yourself. One way to find owls is to look for their roosting places. The barred owl does most of its hunting at night, but sometimes one can be seen resting by day, like this one at Audubon's Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. In the West, the spotted owl, a close relative of the barred owl, may be discovered during daylight hours by a searcher who is very lucky or very experienced, like the legendary Smitty of the Huachucas. Such a roosting bird may be studied at leisure from a respectful distance. But an owl that hunts the night shift is not likely to do many interesting things by day. For an experience that is almost magical, you can go out and find these owls when they are active, in their own element of the night. To see how this is done, we travel to Arizona's Cave Creek Canyon. Here, Ken Kaufman, author of A Field Guide to Advanced Birding, talks about techniques of finding owls in the dark.
Southeast Arizona is especially good for owls because here you have the mountains rising up from the grasslands, and you have a whole series of different kinds of owls as you move up in elevation. Down here in Cave Creek Canyon, it's at the point where the whiskered owl in the oaks is meeting the western screech owl, which is down in the riverside groves out in the grasslands. And you also have flammulated owls coming down to this elevation. They're mostly birds of the ponderosa pines. And there are pygmy owls as well, which are forest birds, but you also get the elf owl coming up into Cave Creek Canyon, and that's a bird that people associate with the desert. So the combination of owls found in this one small canyon is actually very impressive. On a really good night, say in mid-May, if it's a night of a full moon, you could come up with 7 or 8 species of owls right here in one canyon. But that takes a lot of work and sometimes a lot of practice to learn just where the birds are and what sorts of things they'll respond to. A good time of day to go looking for owls is right at dusk. That's just about the time these nocturnal owls are waking up, and they're starting to stretch and open their eyes and look around, and they're calling a lot right then to just sort of put the word out that, hey, this is my territory, and they haven't gone out and started to hunt yet. And the other big advantage is at that time of day you can see a little bit, so you have a better chance of pinning them down. So right at dusk, there's a lot of vocal activity. If you wait just a little bit past that to about the time it's getting dark, there's a quiet period, and for something like an hour, the owls may be really quiet. But if you can stay out and wait through that quiet period, they'll start calling again, and they'll keep going for most of the night, if you can keep up with them. I think what happens during that quiet period is that they're hunting. They're hungry, and they have to go out and find a meal before they really worry about defending the home turf. But once they've had their first mouse for the night, they're ready to think about territorial defense once again. The best way to go out and actually look for owls is to take advantage of the fact that they've got these home territories that they defend. Most birds do that, but owls are mostly defending their territories at night, where most birds are being defensive in the daytime. And the way to bring out this territorial behavior is to fool the owl into thinking that another bird of his own species has moved into his territory. But with a good imitation, if you can imitate the calls of the owls, you're all set. Otherwise, you can carry a tape recorder and play back tapes of the owl. And once you get the bird convinced that there's an intruder around, it's likely to come in to try to chase away this intruder. So you're really playing on the bird's instinct to defend its own home ground. And tapes can be really useful if you haven't practiced imitating owls, but one mistake that a lot of people make is to play the tapes too loudly and too much. I see bird watchers going around through the woods at night playing tapes at top volume and shining lights everywhere, and they don't understand why they can't see anything. Probably the owls are just cowering in fright somewhere and they're afraid to come out. It's much better to turn off the light and turn the volume way down and just sort of go into the woods quietly and listen a lot and play the tapes very softly. Sometimes, if you get a little bit of a response from an owl, it's even a good idea to back up, go away from the bird and play the tape again very softly. You don't want to scare it, you just want to give it the idea that there's an intruder around and get it to come in to do its defensive thing. When you get a response, when you hear an owl calling back, you have to try to determine just where it is. If you're lucky, the bird will come into you. It's a good idea to have your flashlight turned off at this point because you may see the silhouette of the bird as it flies overhead. And if you can get some idea of where it's landed in the tree, then you'll have a good idea of where to aim your flashlight at first. But if you don't see it, and usually you don't, you have to try to pinpoint the location of where it's landed. And you can listen. A good way to increase the sharpness of what you can hear is to cup your hands behind your ears like this. I know it looks silly, but you can really get a good idea of where the sound is coming from. So listen like that, get a good idea of where you think it's coming from, then move a few feet to one side and listen again. And you can triangulate on just where the sound seems to be coming from. And then once you have a good idea of where the bird is, then you can turn on your light and hopefully have the bird right in your sights at that point.
As Ken whistles his imitation of the whiskered screech owl, the real bird responds and flies to a nearby tree. The owl is wary and excited, but its fear of the flashlight is less than its need to defend its territory against what sounds like an intruder of its own species. So many of the owls are creatures of the dark or of the wilderness that we may not often see them without an effort. But these masters of the night add elements of mystery and wildness and beauty to our awareness, enriching the lives of all who care about the wonders of the earth. I rejoice that there are owls, wrote Thoreau. We can rejoice, too, that man has learned to coexist with the owls and to enjoy and appreciate them as these birds adapt to our farms and towns, even to surroundings as modern as big city airports. we can imagine that there is almost a look of understanding that passes between the snowy owl and Danielle Smith as the magnificent bird returns to the wild.